This was probably the most carefully scrutinized officer-involved shooting in Spokane history, and that's because Scott Creach wasn't some two-bit crook. He was a businessman who was trying to protect his property. However, that night, Creach chose to arm himself with a gun, and that decision, right or wrong, ended up costing Creach his life. Scott Creach's nursery had been targeted by thieves the night before, and so when he saw a suspicious car out in his parking lot, Creach went out with a gun to investigate. Deputy Brian Hirzel saw Creach coming towards him.
Deputy Hirzel did not know who Mr. Creach was that night. Mr. Creach presented himself as an unknown, a shirtless individual carrying a handgun that failed to obey the commands of a law enforcement officer.
Creach's family says Mr. Creach did know he was dealing with a sheriff's deputy because Hirzel was driving an unmarked car. However, investigators say once Hirzel was standing outside his cruiser, his uniform and badge were readily apparent.
Once the individual got within 2 feet of the deputy's car, the deputy had a discussion with him at that point, finally got him to back away from the vehicle.
And Mr. Creach also eventually tucked the gun back into his waistband, and that's when Hirzel hit him with his baton. Creach reportedly reacted to the blow by trying to draw his gun again, and that's when Hirzel shot him once in the chest. The Creaches say this incident would have never happened if Hirzel had not been in their parking lot unannounced and uninvited. But the sheriff insists Mr. Creach did know Hirzel was a deputy, but felt because he was on his property, he didn't have to follow orders to disarm himself.
It came down to a matter of choices. And for Deputy Hirzel, that choice was the minute that Mr. Creach reached back behind his back, pulled that weapon, that was the moment of choice. He was faced with a deadly threat.
Now, after the shooting, Deputy Hirzel wanted to explain to detectives why his use of deadly force was justified. However, at the time, a policy that was in effect that called for a 3-day waiting period, and by the time that waiting period expired, Hirzel was already on a pre-planned vacation. That policy has now been modified to allow sheriff's deputies to explain their actions right on the spot if they choose. Reporting live in Spokane, Humphrey, KXLY4.